Hello, dear listeners. Welcome to the podcast. If you enjoy what you hear, please remember to like and subscribe. Happy listening. I'm Daniel, a 38-year-old software engineer who finds solace in the stability of routine. It's my way of maintaining order in a world that often feels unpredictable. But above all, my greatest priority is my family, my wife Emily and our two children, Ethan and Lily. They are the core of my existence, and everything I do is for them. Every line of code, every late night at work, it's all to provide them with the life they deserve. Ethan, our eldest at 9, is endlessly curious and always eager to learn how things work. He's a lot like I was at his age, and I cherish our time together building Lego sets and exploring gadgets. Lily, our vibrant 6-year-old, is brimming with energy and imagination. She loves drawing and fills our home with colorful depictions of her dreams. Their joy and laughter are what I live for. Then there's Emily, the love of my life. From the moment I met her, I knew she was extraordinary. She has a remarkable ability to brighten any room and make everything feel more alive. We've been married for 15 years, and my love for her has only deepened over time. Emily is my opposite in many ways. While I find comfort in stability, she thrives on spontaneity. It's one of the things I love most about her. She brings excitement into our lives, turning ordinary moments into something special. Even with the kids, she keeps our relationship full of life and passion. I adore her for all that she does for our family. Like any marriage, ours has had its share of ups and downs. But I've always been dedicated to ensuring our relationship remains strong and happy. I love Emily deeply and am committed to making her happy. Recently, though, I've noticed some troubling changes. Emily has started dressing up more for girls' nights out, and she's become more protective of her phone, rarely leaving it unattended. She's been spending more time with her friends, particularly a new acquaintance named Adam. She claims he's just a work friend, but there's something about the way she speaks of him that doesn't sit right with me. There have been late nights with vague excuses about losing track of time or having too much to drink. I didn't want to seem overly suspicious, so I told myself I was just being paranoid. Both of us are busy with work. Emily is now a senior marketing manager, and I lead a team at a tech startup. I convinced myself that the distance between us was merely due to our demanding schedules. But the signs are becoming harder to ignore: her distracted demeanor even when we're together, sudden mood shifts, and the way she seems to pull away. I try to hold her. I keep telling myself it's just a rough patch, something every marriage goes through. I have no reason to doubt her, no solid proof that anything is wrong, but that doesn't stop the gnawing feeling in my gut, the sense that something is off. With Christmas around the corner, I wanted to do something special for Emily, something to remind her how much she means to me. We had a party coming up that we'd been looking forward to for weeks, a chance to unwind and enjoy ourselves with friends and family. I had a surprise plan for afterward, a gift I knew would make her happy. After the party, I was going to give her tickets for a surprise trip to Paris. Just the two of us, no work, no kids, just time to reconnect and rekindle what we have. The night of the Christmas party finally arrived, and the house was alive with excitement. Ethan and Lily could hardly wait to get there, bursting with energy as they showed off their new holiday outfits. Ethan, looking dapper in his little suit and tie, carried himself with the seriousness of someone much older. Lily, in her sparkly dress, twirled around the living room, her laughter echoing off the walls. Their joy was infectious, filling the house with a warmth that made everything else seem distant and unimportant. Emily looked absolutely stunning. She wore a deep red dress that hugged her figure perfectly, her hair cascading in soft waves down her back. I couldn't take my eyes off her, admiring how beautiful she looked and feeling a surge of love and pride. She caught me staring and gave me a playful smile, the kind that reminded me of our early days together, back when everything felt new and exciting. We had planned to drive to the party together, but just as we were getting ready to leave, Emily mentioned that she'd rather go with her friends. It surprised me a little, but she explained that it would be fun to arrive with them, and since they lived nearby, it made sense. I felt a small pang of disappointment but didn't want to make a big deal out of it. I figured the kids and I would head over in our car, and she promised to meet us there soon after. With Emily heading off with her friends, the kids and I piled into the car. Christmas music played softly on the radio as we made our way through the city. Ethan and Lily were still full of excitement, singing along to the tunes and pointing out Christmas lights as we passed. The drive was pleasant, even when we took a few wrong turns due to the holiday traffic. I wasn't in any rush, it was just nice to be with them, sharing in the holiday spirit. But then, as we were navigating a quieter, dimly lit street, something unexpected happened. Out of nowhere, a small gray cat darted across the road. I reacted quickly, slamming on the brakes, and the car screeched to a halt. The kids gasped in the back seat, their eyes wide with shock. I stepped out of the car to check on the cat, my heart sinking as I approached it. The poor thing was lying still on the road, not moving. I carefully picked it up and carried it to the side of the road, placing it gently under a tree. When I got back in the car, Ethan and Lily were watching me intently, their faces pressed against the windows. "Is the kitty okay, Daddy?" Lily asked, her voice soft and full of concern. "It's sleeping now, sweetie," I said gently, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's in a better place." The mood in the car shifted after that, with the kids growing quieter, their earlier excitement dampened by the sudden turn of events. But as we neared the party, the festive lights and sounds began to lift their spirits again. By the time we arrived, they were ready to dive back into the fun. The house was buzzing with laughter and conversation as we walked in, the air thick with the scent of holiday food and the warmth of a crackling fire. Ethan and Lily quickly spotted their friends and bolted off, leaving me to mingle. I watched them for a moment, smiling as Ethan showed off his new toys to a group of boys while Lily joined a few girls in a corner where they were playing with dolls. Seeing them so happy made me feel at ease, like everything was as it should be. As I moved through the party, greeting a few familiar faces, I suddenly heard a voice call out, "Daniel, is that really you?" I turned to see Mike, an old friend I hadn't seen in years, grinning widely as he made his way toward me. "Mike! Man, it's been forever," I said, genuinely happy to see him. We exchanged a quick hug, clapping each other on the back. "Too long, buddy," Mike replied, his smile just as big. "How the hell have you been?" We quickly fell into conversation, catching up on everything that had happened since we last saw each other. Mike hadn't changed much, still the same easygoing guy with a knack for making you feel like no time had passed at all. "So, how's life treating you?" he asked, taking a sip of his drink. "Can I complain?" I said with a chuckle. "Work is good, kids are growing up too fast, and Emily, well, she's as beautiful as ever. What about you? How is everything?" "Busy, but good," Mike said, nodding. "Got married a couple of years ago, and we just had our first kid, a little girl. It's been exhausting but worth it." We laughed together, sharing stories about parenthood and the sleepless nights that came with it. It felt good to reconnect, to talk about the old days and see how far we'd both come. As we chatted, I glanced around the room, keeping an eye on the kids. Ethan was deep in conversation with some boys his age, probably discussing video games or trading cards. Lily, ever the social butterfly, had moved on to a group of older girls who were showing her how to braid hair. It warmed my heart to see them so happy, so carefree. "By the way," Mike said, bringing my attention back to him, "I think I saw Emily a little while ago. She was heading upstairs with someone, looked like she was in a hurry." "Upstairs?" I repeated, surprised. I didn't even realize there was an upstairs here. "Yeah, just up those stairs over there," Mike said, pointing toward a staircase at the far end of the room. "Maybe she wanted a quieter spot to talk or something. You know how these parties can get." I nodded, not thinking much of it. "Thanks for the heads up. I'll go check on her in a bit." We continued chatting for a few more minutes, catching up on old friends and laughing about shared memories. It felt good, like no time had passed at all. But eventually, curiosity got the better of me, and I decided it was time to find Emily and see what she was up to. After wrapping up our conversation, I made my way through the crowded house, heading toward the stairs Mike had pointed out. The sounds of the party grew more distant as I climbed, leaving behind the laughter and music for the quieter, more intimate atmosphere of the upstairs rooms. I wasn't exactly worried, just curious about who Emily might be catching up with. But as I reached the top of the stairs and saw a door slightly ajar at the end of the hallway, I realized that this might not be the quiet reunion I had imagined. I reached the top of the stairs, finding myself in a narrow hallway bathed in shadows. The sounds of the party below had faded into a distant murmur, leaving behind a heavy silence that seemed to press in on all sides. As I walked down the hall, the dim light from the wall sconces cast long, eerie shadows, making everything feel strangely out of place. Most of the doors were closed, save for one at the far end, slightly ajar with a faint light spilling through the crack. Curiosity drove me forward. I gently pushed the door open, stepping into the room. It was even darker inside, with only a sliver of moonlight slipping through a small, partially covered window. The air felt thick, almost stifling, like the room hadn't been touched in ages. Dust motes floated in the beam of light from my phone's flashlight, giving the space an unsettling, forgotten quality. The room was sparsely furnished, with an old, worn armchair in one corner and a dresser against the opposite wall. The wood of the floor creaked under my weight as I moved, the sound amplified in the side silence. My flashlight cut through the darkness, sweeping across the dull, peeling wallpaper and the heavy drapes that hung limply on either side of the window. As I aimed the light toward the center of the room, the beam landed on the bed, and there she was, Emily. My heart stopped as the light revealed her chained to the headboard, her wrists bound in cold metal that glinted in the beam. Her body was laid out on the bed, her dress ripped and hanging in tatters on the floor beside the bed. Her skin looked pale and ghostly in the dim light, a stark contrast to the dark fabric of the sheets beneath her. The room was so silent that I could hear the faint rustling of the chains as she moved slightly, her breath hitching in the darkness. Then I saw him. A man, muscular and broad-shouldered, his back turned to me, loomed over her, moving with a slow, deliberate rhythm as he violated her. His large hands gripped her hips, his movements confident and unhurried as if he owned every inch of the space he occupied. The dim light from my phone revealed the sharp contours of his muscles, flexing and tightening with each thrust. He seemed completely unaware of my presence, utterly absorbed in what he was doing. But I couldn't look away. My mind struggled to grasp the reality of what I was seeing, the grotesque betrayal playing out before my eyes. I felt rooted to the spot, my body refusing to move as my heart pounded in my chest, each beat echoing in the hollow silence of the room. I raised the light higher, casting a wider glow over the scene. Emily's eyes were squeezed shut, her face turned away as if she couldn't bear to acknowledge what was happening, or who was standing there witnessing it. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, rapid breaths, her body tense yet eerily still, as if she was waiting for this nightmare to end. But the nightmare was real, more real than anything I had ever experienced. The weight of it bore down on me, crushing any semblance of rational thought. I wanted to shout, to scream, to tear the man away from her, but the words caught in my throat, choked by the raw, jagged pain that ripped through me. For a moment, the room felt like it was closing in, the walls pressing tighter, the air growing thicker, suffocating. The darkness seemed to seep into my very being, filling me with a cold, numbing disbelief. And then the man stopped. He turned his head slowly, his eyes locking onto mine. There was no fear, no surprise in his gaze, just a cold, indifferent acknowledgement, as if I was nothing more than an uninvited guest in a private moment. He held my stare for what felt like an eternity, the silence between us thick with the unspoken horror of what I had just witnessed. For a split second, everything seemed frozen in time. The weight of what I had just seen hit me like a freight train, but it wasn't shock that flooded my senses, it was rage. A pure, burning fury that consumed every rational thought. Without thinking, I dropped my phone, its light casting wild shadows as it rolled across the floor, and I launched myself at the man. I had been out of the cage for years, but my body still remembered the movements, the instincts, of an MMA fighter. My muscles coiled, and I closed the distance between us in a heartbeat, throwing a powerful right hook aimed at his jaw. The force of my punch connected with a sickening crack, and the man stumbled back, caught off guard by the sudden assault. But he wasn't just some random guy. He was built like a brick wall, solid muscle and raw power. He shook off the hit faster than I expected, his eyes narrowing as he steadied himself, sizing me up. I could see the cold calculation in his gaze as he assessed the threat I posed. He wasn't scared, he was ready. He came at me with a quick, brutal jab aimed at my ribs. I twisted to the side, deflecting the blow with my forearm, and countered with a knee strike to his midsection. He grunted but barely flinched, using his thick arm to block my follow-up punch. His strength was formidable. Each of his moves packed a weight behind it that I hadn't faced in years. He shoved me back, creating some distance between us, and then rushed forward, trying to tackle me to the ground. But I was faster. I sidestepped at the last second, grabbed his arm, and twisted it behind his back in a submission hold. He snarled in pain, but before I could lock it in, he powered through, driving his elbow into my gut with a force that knocked the wind out of me. I staggered back, gasping for air, but he didn't give me time to recover. He charged at me again, his fists like hammers, swinging with a ferocity that spoke of his own experience in brawls like this. One of his punches clipped my jaw, sending a shockwave of pain through my skull and filling my mouth with the coppery taste of blood. But pain was nothing new to me, it fueled the fire in my chest. I shook it off, blocking the next punch with my forearm and answering with a sharp kick to his thigh, aiming for the nerve cluster to weaken his leg. He grunted, his stance faltering, and I seized the moment. I closed in, grabbing him by the shoulders and driving my knee into his ribs with all the force I could muster. I felt the impact reverberate through his body, heard the breath rush out of him in a pained gasp. He retaliated with a headbutt, catching me off guard and making stars explode behind my eyes. I stumbled back, momentarily dazed, and he capitalized on it, swinging a vicious hook that caught me square in the side of the head. I went down, crashing to the floor, my vision swimming. But I wasn't done yet. I rolled to the side just in time to avoid his boot as it stomped down where my head had been seconds before. Adrenaline surged through my veins as I pushed myself up, shaking off the disorientation. I could hear Emily's chains rattling behind me, her muffled cries barely registering as the blood pounded in my ears. I sprang back to my feet, wiping the blood from my lip, and squared off with him again. He was breathing heavily now, his chest rising and falling with each ragged breath, but so was I. We circled each other like predators, both of us battered but far from beaten. He made the first move, a feint with his left hand before lunging with a right hook. I ducked under. Closing the distance, I delivered a brutal uppercut to his jaw. His head snapped back, and for a split second, I saw the glaze of pain in his eyes. I followed up with a barrage of punches, each one aimed with precision, jaw, ribs, kidney. The impact of each blow sent shockwaves through my knuckles, but I didn't let up. He staggered back, clearly feeling the effects, but in a last-ditch effort, he swung wildly, catching me on the shoulder with enough force to send me spinning. I used the momentum, pivoting on my heel, and delivered a roundhouse kick to the side of his head. My foot connected solidly, and he went down hard, crashing to the floor with a thud that shook the room. For a moment, he lay there dazed, struggling to get up. I stood over him, chest heaving, fists clenched, ready to strike again if he made a move. But as I looked down at him, the anger started to drain away, replaced by a cold, hollow emptiness. The fight was over. I turned, breathing hard, and saw Emily still lying on the bed, her eyes wide, filled with a mix of fear and something else, something that cut deeper than any wound I had sustained in that brutal, bone-crushing fight. The room was heavy with the aftermath of the fight, the silence broken only by the ragged breaths of the man lying on the floor and the distant murmur of the party below. My chest heaved as I tried to steady myself, the adrenaline slowly ebbing away, leaving behind a painful awareness of the situation I now faced. Emily, still chained to the bed, looked at me with wide, tear-streaked eyes. The fear in her gaze was unmistakable, but there was something else there, something that twisted the knife deeper into my heart. Regret, shame, maybe even guilt. I turned to her, my voice raw from the intensity of the fight. "Why, Emily?" I asked, the words coming out harsher than I intended. Why did you do this? For a moment, she just stared at me, her lips trembling as she struggled to find the words. The room was so quiet that I could hear the faint sound of her breathing, shallow and uneven. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper, cracking under the weight of her confession. I was drunk, Daniel, she began, her words slurring slightly as if the alcohol still had a hold on her. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I wasn't thinking. I wasn't in control. Her explanation hit me like a punch to the gut. The reality of it sank in. This wasn't some carefully planned betrayal, some cold and calculated affair. It was a moment of reckless abandon fueled by alcohol and poor judgment. But that didn't make it any easier to swallow. It didn't undo the damage, it didn't erase the image of her with that man, chained to the bed like some twisted, nightmarish scene I could never forget. I wanted to say something, to lash out, to express the turmoil that was tearing me apart inside, but the words wouldn't come. My throat felt tight, my mind a chaotic mess of anger, sadness, and confusion. I could see the desperation in Emily's eyes as she waited for my response, but all I could do was stare at her, my mind racing as I tried to make sense of it all. Suddenly, the distant noise of the party seemed to grow louder. It took me a moment to realize what was happening. The sounds from our fight must have drawn attention. Footsteps echoed from the hallway outside the room, voices murmuring in concern. Panic flickered in Emily's eyes, and I knew she was thinking the same thing I was. The partygoers had heard everything. The door to the room swung open, and a few people from the party stood in the doorway, their faces a mix of shock and confusion. They looked from me, battered and bloodied, to the man still groaning on the floor, and then to Emily, chained and disheveled on the bed. The scene must have looked like something out of a nightmare. What the hell happened here? One of the guests asked, his voice tinged with disbelief, before I could respond. Another voice chimed in from behind them. Someone needs to call the cops. This isn't right. The words sent a jolt through me, snapping me out of my daze. The reality of what was happening crashed down like a tidal wave. This was no longer just between Emily and me, it had spiraled into something much bigger. I could hear someone fumbling with their phone, dialing 911, as the murmur of the crowd grew louder. I turned back to Emily, who was now sobbing quietly, her body trembling with each breath. The man on the floor groaned, struggling to push himself up, but he was too weak to do much more than shift slightly. Everything was spinning out of control, the situation escalating far beyond anything I could have imagined. The sirens in the distance were faint at first, barely audible over the noise of the party, but they grew louder with each passing second. The room seemed to close in around me, the walls pressing tighter, the air growing thicker. There was no escaping what was coming next, no way to undo the nightmare that had unfolded. All I could do was stand there, waiting for the inevitable as the sirens drew closer, signaling the arrival of a reality I wasn't sure I was ready to face. The room felt impossibly small as I stood there, caught in the middle of a surreal nightmare that had spiraled out of control. The harsh reality of what had just transpired was setting in, and with it came a wave of nausea and dread that I couldn't shake. Emily's sobs were soft but piercing, each one cutting through the air like a knife. The man on the floor groaned again, attempting to shift his weight, but he was still too dazed to stand. The people crowded at the doorway exchanged glances, their faces a mix of shock, pity, and morbid curiosity. I could see them piecing together the scene, their expressions shifting from confusion to horror as the gravity of the situation became clear. This wasn't just a drunken mishap, it was something far darker. And I could feel their judgment, their unspoken accusations hanging in the air. One of the partygoers, a tall man in a dark suit, stepped forward cautiously. He was older, with graying hair and a stern face that seemed to harden as he took in the scene. "What happened here?" he demanded, his voice calm but authoritative. I swallowed hard, trying to find the words to explain the inexplicable. My throat felt dry, and my mind was a tangled mess of emotions, rage, betrayal, confusion, but none of them seemed to translate into coherent speech. All I could manage was a rough shake of my head, as if that gesture alone could convey the chaos of the last few minutes. The man in the suit turned his gaze to Emily, still chained to the bed. Her tear-streaked face was pale, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and shame. He let out a sigh, heavy with disappointment, and looked back at me. "This doesn't look good," he said, his tone shifting from concern to something more accusatory. "The police are on their way. You'd better have a damn good explanation for this." Before I could respond, the distant wail of sirens pierced the air, growing louder with each passing second. The man's words hung in the silence that followed, and the others in the doorway began to murmur amongst themselves, the tension in the room thickening as the reality of the situation began to sink in. The sirens drew closer, echoing through the house, and the weight of what was about to happen settled on me like a crushing burden. I looked at Emily again, searching for something in her eyes, an apology, an explanation, anything that could make sense of the madness we had just lived through. But she couldn't meet my gaze, her eyes fixed on the ceiling as her body shook with quiet sobs. The sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway, growing louder as they approached the room. Moments later, 2 police officers appeared in the doorway, their presence commanding the attention of everyone in the room. Both were in their late 30s, dressed in standard blue uniforms, their faces set in stern, unreadable expressions as they took in the scene before them. "What is going on here?" one of the officers asked, his voice steady but laced with authority. He scanned the room, his gaze lingering on Emily's chains, the man on the floor, and then finally settling on me. His eyes narrowed slightly as he waited for a response, the silence in the room growing heavier with each passing second. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself as I prepared to explain, but where could I even begin? How could I possibly put into words the madness of the last few minutes, the devastating reality of what I had just witnessed? The officer's expectant gaze bore into me, demanding an explanation that I wasn't sure I could provide. I found them like this," I finally managed to say, my voice rough and uneven. "I came upstairs and this is what I found." The officer's eyes flicked to Emily, then to the man on the floor, who was beginning to regain his bearings, propping himself up on one elbow. The other officer stepped forward, crouching down to check on him. "Do you need medical attention?" he asked, his voice brusque, but the man shook his head slowly, still dazed. The first officer turned back to me, his expression hardening. "And you're saying you just found them like this?" he asked, a note of skepticism creeping into his voice. "Yes," I said, forcing myself to stand tall despite the storm of emotions swirling inside me. "I walked in, and they were like this. I didn't know what to think, I just reacted." The officer's gaze didn't waver, but I could see the gears turning in his mind as he tried to piece together the scene. The tension in the room was palpable, every breath I took feeling like a struggle against the oppressive weight of what was unfolding. "Do you know this man?" the officer asked, nodding toward the muscular figure now sitting up on the floor, holding his head in his hands. "No," I replied, my voice firmer this time. "I've never seen him before tonight." The officer nodded slowly, as if considering my words, and then turned to Emily. "Ma'am, do you know this man?" Emily's breath hitched, and for a moment, she didn't respond. Finally, she nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes, I know him." The officer's eyes narrowed. "And what happened here tonight? How did this situation come to be?" Emily hesitated, glancing at me briefly before looking away. "I was drunk," she said, her voice trembling. "I wasn't thinking. I didn't know what I was doing." The officer's expression remained unreadable as he processed her words. He glanced back at me, then at the man on the floor, before turning to his partner. "We'll need to take statements from everyone involved," he said, his tone all business, "and we'll need to get these chains off her." The second officer, who had been helping the man on the floor, nodded and pulled out a small toolkit. He approached the bed where Emily lay still, her wrists bound by the cold metal. As he began working on the locks, the first officer motioned for me to step outside with him. "Let's talk out here," he said. His voice was calm but firm. "I need to get a clearer picture of what happened." I followed him out into the hallway, my heart pounding as the reality of the situation closed in around me. the other guests had gathered near the stairs, their whispers filling the air with a mix of curiosity and concern. I could feel their eyes on me, judging, speculating, as the officer led me away from the room and into a quieter corner of the house. "What's your name?" the officer asked, pulling out a notepad and pen. "Daniel," I replied, my voice tight. "Daniel Roberts." "All right, Daniel," he said, scribbling down my name. "I need you to tell me everything that happened tonight, starting from the beginning. Don't leave anything out." I took a deep breath, trying to collect my thoughts. The weight of the night's events pressed down on me, making it hard to think, but I knew I had to get through this. I had to find a way to explain what had happened, to make sense of the madness that had unfolded in that dark room. As I began to recount the evening's events, the officer listened intently, his pen scratching across the notepad as he jotted down my words. I told him about the party, about how Emily had gone with her friends, about the drive with the kids, and about the strange turn of events that had led me upstairs to that room. When I got to the part where I found Emily and the man, my voice faltered, the memory still too fresh, too raw to recount without feeling the sting of betrayal all over again. The officer didn't interrupt, just kept writing, his face a mask of professionalism as he absorbed every detail. Finally, I finished my account, and the officer looked up from his notes, his expression softening slightly. "This is a tough situation, Daniel," he said quietly. "I'm going to need to verify everything with the others involved, but from what you've told me, it sounds like there was a lot of alcohol and poor judgment involved. We'll need to sort this out." I nodded numbly, the weight of the night pressing down on me with renewed force. The officer's words did little to comfort me. There was no solace in knowing that this wasn't some calculated betrayal but rather a reckless, drunken mistake. The damage was done, and nothing could change that. As the officer continued his questioning, the distant sound of Emily's sobs drifted through the hallway, a haunting reminder of the life we had shared and the broken pieces now scattered around us. The night stretched on like a cruel joke, every minute dragging us further from the life we had known and deeper into the wreckage left behind. After giving my testimony, the police continued to speak with Emily, the man, and a few of the guests who had witnessed the aftermath. The tension in the air was thick enough to choke on, and the party that had once been filled with laughter and joy was now a scene of discomfort and disbelief. Eventually, the police cleared out, leaving us with the wreckage of what had once been a celebration. The guests began to disperse, awkward goodbyes exchanged as they shuffled out of the house, their eyes avoiding mine. No one knew what to say. What could they say? The damage was done, and there was no one doing it. I collected Ethan and Lily, who by some miracle had been blissfully unaware of the chaos that had unfolded upstairs. They had spent the evening playing games and eating sweets with their friends, their laughter the only bright spot in an otherwise disastrous night. But as I gathered them up and loaded them into the car, I knew that the real challenge was yet to come. Emily was silent as she got into the passenger seat, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She avoided looking at me, staring straight ahead as we drove through the quiet streets. The kids, sensing the tension, were unusually quiet in the back seat, their earlier excitement drained away. I glanced at them in the rearview mirror, my heart aching at the thought of how this would affect them. We drove straight to my parents' house, where I had arranged for Ethan and Lily to stay with my parents for a few days. I couldn't bear the thought of them being around while I tried to make sense of what had happened and figure out what came next. My parents were understanding, though I could see the worry etched on their faces as they took the kids inside. I told them it was just a rough patch, that Emily and I needed some time alone to sort things out. They didn't ask questions, but their concern was palpable. As I drove away from my parents' house, the silence between Emily and me grew heavier, thicker, suffocating. The events of the night replayed in my mind, each detail a fresh wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. But there was nothing left to say, not tonight. We were both too exhausted, too drained to face the inevitable conversation looming over us. When we got home, Emily went straight to the guest room without a word, closing the door behind her. I stood in the hallway for a moment, staring at the closed door, trying to process the whirlwind of emotions that had taken hold of me. But I was too tired, too numb to think straight, so I retreated to our bedroom, collapsing onto the bed, hoping for sleep that I knew wouldn't come. The next morning, the house was eerily quiet. The absence of Ethan and Lily was a stark reminder of how much had changed in just a few short hours. I lay in bed for a while, staring at the ceiling, trying to summon the strength to face whatever came next. My body ached from the tension, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional turmoil churning inside me. Eventually, I got up and made my way to the kitchen, where I found Emily sitting at the table, a cup of coffee in her hands. She looked tired, her hair disheveled, her eyes downcast. The remnants of the previous night's makeup were smudged around her eyes, giving her a haunted appearance. She didn't look up as I entered, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she gripped the cup like it was the only thing holding her together. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat down across from her. For a moment, we just sat there in silence, the weight of everything unsaid hanging in the air between us. I didn't know how to start, what to say that could even begin to address the mess we were in. But before I could find the words, Emily spoke, her voice hoarse and barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry, Daniel," she said, her eyes still fixed on the coffee cup in her hands. "I really am." The apology, though sincere, felt hollow, like it couldn't possibly carry the weight of what had happened. I waited for her to say more, to explain, but she just stared into her cup as if searching for answers in the dark liquid. "Why, Emily?" I finally asked, the question that had been burning inside me since last night. "Why did you do it?" She looked up at me then, her eyes filled with a sadness that seemed to run deep. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words seemed to catch in. She cleared her throat. She took a deep breath, and when she finally spoke, her voice was laced with a bitterness that caught me off guard. "I don't know, Daniel," she said, shaking her head slightly. Maybe I was just tired." "Tired?" I echoed, confusion and hurt battling for dominance. "Tired of what?" "Of everything," she blurted out, the words spilling from her lips before she could stop them. "Of being the obedient wife, the perfect mother, the woman who always does what's expected of her. I was drunk, yes, but I wasn't out of control. I knew what I was doing, and maybe I wanted it to happen." The room seemed to tilt, her words hitting me like a physical blow. "You wanted it to happen?" I repeated, the shock and disbelief clear in my voice. She nodded slowly, tears welling up in her eyes again. "I don't know when it started, Daniel, but I've felt trapped for a long time, trapped in this life, in this role that I never really wanted. And last night, I just couldn't do it anymore. I needed to feel something, anything, that wasn't the weight of being who I'm supposed to be." The air between us was thick with tension, the words hanging like a dark cloud over the room. I stared at her, trying to reconcile the woman sitting across from me with the one I thought I knew, the woman I had loved for so long. But this Emily, the one admitting she wanted to tear everything apart, was a stranger. "So what?" I asked, my voice tight with barely contained anger. "You decided that ****ing some random guy at a party was the answer? That it would fix whatever you think is wrong with your life?" She flinched at my harsh tone but didn't look away. "I didn't think, Daniel. I wasn't looking for a solution, I just wanted to escape, even if it was only for a few minutes. And I know how get up that sounds, believe me, I do, but it's the truth." Her words hung in the air between us, heavy and suffocating. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me, leaving me in freefall, grasping at anything to make sense of the world that had suddenly become unrecognizable. "Why didn't you say anything?" I asked, my voice softer now, more bewildered than angry. "Why didn't you talk to me? Tell me how you were feeling?" She let out a bitter laugh, one more self-deprecating than anything else. "I don't know, Daniel. Maybe I was afraid. Afraid of disappointing you, of admitting that I wasn't happy. You always seemed so content, so sure of what you wanted. And I guess I convinced myself that if I just kept going, eventually, I'd feel the same. But I didn't, and I don't know how to fix that." The confession hung between us, raw and unfiltered. The ugly truth laid bare for the first time. I could feel the cracks widening in the foundation of everything we had built, the life we had shared, and I didn't know if there was any way to repair the damage. The silence stretched on, filled only by the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. It was the kind of silence that wasn't just a lack of sound, but an absence of everything, the connection we once had, the trust, the love that had seemed so unshakable. I didn't have the answers. I didn't know what came next. But as I sat there, staring at the woman I thought I knew, I realized that the road ahead was uncertain, and the future we had once envisioned together might be nothing more than a memory. The words hung in the air between us like a dark cloud, the gravity of Emily's confession pressing down on me, suffocating and relentless. The woman I had loved for so many years was now a stranger, someone I could no longer recognize. Everything she had said, the bitterness, the resentment, the desire to escape, it all twisted the knife deeper into my heart, leaving me bleeding and broken. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at her, trying to find some semblance of the life we had built together, some fragment of the love that had once been so strong. But it was gone, shattered by the brutal honesty of her words. In its place was a cold, hard reality that I could no longer ignore. I took a deep breath, the decision forming in my mind with a clarity that startled even me. "I can't do this anymore, Emily," I said, my voice steady but laced with a finality that left no room for doubt. "I don't want to do this anymore." Her eyes widened, the tears that had been brimming finally spilling over as she realized what I was saying. "Daniel, please," she started, her voice breaking, but I cut her off before she could continue. "No," I said firmly, shaking my head. "It's over, Emily. After what you did, after what you've just told me, there's no going back. I can't stay in a marriage where I'm just a placeholder, where you feel trapped and resentful. And I sure as hell can't stay with someone who could do what you did last night." She looked at me, her face crumpling as the reality of my words hit her. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I didn't want to hurt you, Daniel. I was just lost." I let out a bitter laugh, one that held no humor. "Well, you succeeded, Emily. You hurt me more than you can possibly imagine. But this isn't just about me. This is about our kids, about the life we've built, and how you've torn it apart." The weight of my words seemed to crush her, and she crumpled, burying her face in her hands as sobs racked her body. But I couldn't afford to let myself be swayed by her tears, not this time. There was too much at stake, Ethan and Lily, our children, who deserved better than to be caught in the middle of this mess. "I'm filing for divorce," I said, my voice cold, detached, as if I were talking about someone else's life. "There's no saving this, and I won't subject myself, or our kids, to any more of this pain. You wanted to escape, Emily? Well, now you're free." Her sobs grew louder, more desperate, but I forced myself to stay strong, to focus on what had to be done. "And the kids?" she asked through her tears, her voice trembling with fear and desperation. "What about Ethan and Lily?" "They're staying with me," I said, my tone firm, leaving no room for negotiation. "You've shown that you're not capable of putting their needs first, not after what you did. I'm going to make sure they have the stability and love they deserve, and that means keeping them away from you." Her face crumpled further, and she shook her head as if refusing to accept what I was saying. "No, Daniel, please. I'm their mother, they need me. They need someone they can trust," I countered, my voice hardening. "Someone who won't betray them, who won't put their own selfish desires above the well-being of their family. And after last night, I don't trust you with them. You've lost that right." The finality of my words seemed to break something inside her, and she slumped in her chair. Her sobs grew weaker, more hopeless. I watched her for a moment, feeling a strange mix of sadness and resolve. This was the woman I had once loved, the mother of my children, but she was also the woman who had destroyed our life together, and there was no coming back from that. "I'll talk to a lawyer first thing tomorrow," I said, standing up from the table. "We'll figure out the details later, but for now, I think it is best if you stay somewhere else. I need time to process all of this, and the kids, they don't need to see us like this." Emily looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen, her face streaked with tears. She opened her mouth to say something, but the words seemed to die on her lips. There was nothing left to say, the decision had been made, and the path forward was clear, even if it was one I had never imagined taking. I turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving her sitting there, broken and alone. The weight of the moment pressed down on me as I made my way to the living room, where I sat down heavily on the couch, my mind spinning with the enormity of what had just happened. This was the end of the life I had known, the end of the family I had cherished. But it was also the beginning of something new, something that, despite the pain, I knew was necessary for me, for Ethan and Lily, and even for Emily, who had clearly lost herself somewhere along the way. The road ahead was uncertain, but I knew one thing for sure: I wouldn't allow my children to be collateral damage in this tragedy. They deserved better, and I was going to make sure they got it, no matter what it took. The days following my decision to file for divorce were a whirlwind of legal meetings, paperwork, and painful conversations. The reality of what lay ahead settled in, and I knew that the road to reclaiming my life and ensuring the well-being of Ethan and Lily would be a difficult one, but I was resolute. There was no going back now. Emily had moved out, staying with a friend until she could find a more permanent place. Our communication was minimal, limited to arrangements concerning the kids, who were still staying with my parents. The house, once filled with the noise and warmth of family, was now a cold, empty shell. But I welcomed the solitude. It gave me time to think, to process everything that had happened, and to prepare for the battle ahead. As the divorce proceedings approached, I threw myself into preparing for the case. I wanted full custody of Ethan and Lily. There was no question in my mind that they deserved stability, something Emily had proven she could no longer provide. My lawyer was confident, assuring me that I had a strong case given the events of that night and Emily's actions. But as the trial date loomed closer, something unsettling happened. One evening, as I was leaving my lawyer's office, I found a note tucked under the windshield wiper of my car. It was written in bold, aggressive letters: "Drop the custody case, or you'll all regret it." I stared at the note, my mind racing. A chill ran down my spine, but it wasn't fear that gripped me, it was anger. Whoever had left this note clearly thought they could intimidate me into backing down, but they were wrong. If anything, this only strengthened my resolve. No one was going to threaten me and get away with it, especially when it came to the safety and well-being of my children. I took the note straight to my lawyer. He frowned as he read it, his expression darkening. "We should report this to the police," he said, his voice firm. "This is a clear attempt at intimidation." I nodded, agreeing without hesitation. "Do whatever needs to be done, but this isn't going to change anything. I'm not backing down." The police were contacted, and an investigation was opened, but there was little they could do with so few leads. The note was anonymous, and there were no witnesses. Still, the threat hung over me like a dark cloud in the days leading up to the trial. But every time I looked at that note, it only fueled my determination. Whoever was behind it had underestimated me. When the day of the trial finally arrived, I felt a strange sense of calm. The courthouse was a somber place, its cold, sterile hallways filled with the quiet murmur of lawyers and clients preparing for their own battles. My lawyer and I walked into the courtroom, our strategy clear and focused. This was my chance to protect my kids, to ensure they had the stability and care they needed. Emily was already there, sitting with her attorney. She looked tired, worn down by the weight of everything that had happened. When our eyes met, there was no anger, no pleading, just a hollow sadness. But I couldn't let myself be swayed by her appearance. I had to stay strong for Ethan and Lily. The trial was intense, the air in the courtroom heavy with tension as each side presented its case. My lawyer was relentless, laying out the details of Emily's actions, her instability, and the clear evidence that she was unfit to have custody of the children. The events of that night, the drunkenness, the infidelity, the sheer recklessness, all painted a damning picture. Emily's lawyer tried to counter, arguing that she had made a mistake, that she was seeking help and deserved a second chance. But the judge wasn't swayed, the facts were too clear, the risks too great. After hours of testimony, cross-examinations, and arguments, the judge finally rendered his decision. My heart pounded as I waited for the words that would determine our future. The judge began, his voice calm and unwavering. Regarding the custody of Ethan and Lily Roberts, the court has determined that granting full custody to their father, Daniel Roberts, is in the children's best interest. Emily Roberts, their mother, will be given supervised visitation rights until further review. The relief that surged through me was so intense that it almost made me collapse. I had succeeded. Ethan and Lily would be safe and under my care. Yet, the victory brought no joy, only a profound, bittersweet sense of closure. As we exited the courtroom, Emily approached. Her eyes were teary, and though she seemed on the verge of speaking, no words emerged. I felt a pang of sorrow for the woman I once loved, but I understood this was the necessary path, for me, for her, and most importantly, for our children. Leaving the courthouse, I felt the weight of the recent weeks lift. The threats, the trial, the betrayal, all were behind me now. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: I was committed to ensuring Ethan and Lily had the life they deserved. No threats or challenges would alter that resolve. Driving to collect my kids from my parents' house, a firm determination settled within me. The path ahead would be challenging, but we would face it together as a family. Whatever came next, I was confident we would navigate it together.